Okay. Good morning, everybody. And
morning.
Welcome to our webinar for today, which is dealing with the curious case of a notary public. We're going to explore a little bit about what a notary public is, what they do, and then also just about how they can actually help all of us as well. So today you've got me, Mark Leathers. I'm a director here at McNaughton Company, attorney, conveyancer, and notary public. Opposite me, I've got Dave, who's the founding attorney actually of McNaughton Company, who's also an attorney, conveyancer, and notary public. And then we're joined by Sasha Posner from our Santon office, who is also an attorney, conveyancer, and notary public. And then our resident fiduciary expert, PJ Fourie, again, but I'll let them all as they talk just say hello. Before we get going on actual notarial stuff, Dave is also our COVID-19 guru, along with all things regulations orientated there. And obviously, as of yesterday, we're now into level 3. So Dave, is there anything interesting that you want to just tell us about what's changed, what we can and can't do?
Yeah, Mark. Hi, everybody. It is pretty funny from my point of view because our regulations sometimes last a week and they're replaced by something different. So trying to keep pace with what's lawful and what's unlawful is like it's a moving car you've got to jump out of. But the main difference with level 3 is the abolishment of the general permit system and the curfew. So I think that's what's most welcome. There are still a host of permits required, but they are for all different odd purposes. So, for instance, you need a permit for moving home, you need one to take care of somebody, you need one to go to work in another province, you need one for fishing, you need one for funerals, one for moving your child. It's all crazy. So there are a whole range of permits required, but the general permit required for people going to and from work within an area has been abolished, and that we're thankful for. More later.
Okay. So let's get on to what we're actually here for quickly. Sasha, can you tell us what is a notary public?
Sure, Mark. A notary public is someone who's an admitted attorney who then decides they want to write and pass an additional exam to be a notary public. And then once that exam is passed, they have to actually apply to court to be admitted and enrolled as a notary public.
Okay. And is there anything different? Tell us a bit about, firstly, what is the difference between a notary and a commissioner of oaths? What sort of work does a notary do?
So a commissioner of oaths basically verifies the authenticity of documents that are to be used within the country. So if you need a certified copy of an ID document, a proof of residence document, then a commissioner of oaths can do that for you. And attorneys, accountants, police officers are all automatically commissioners of oaths. A person can also choose to be a commissioner of oaths where they'd have to apply to the magistrate's court to be designated as one. So a noteworthy point is that a commissioner of oaths can't actually charge a fee to certify documents. With a notary does actually charge fees, and a notary can certify or authenticate documents that are needed for another country. So that's the difference with authentication of documents, but then a notary has many other duties also.
Can I cut in and say there's also the Hague Convention, which international countries have agreed to being a process that they will accept for documents that are for use in a different country or originating from another country. And those who subscribe to the Hague Convention then have a process and a procedure to follow. And when the document is certified by the notary here with a certain authentication stamp, it's accepted in the other country as having followed that process.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So based on that, I'm understanding that notaries are often also needed if you might be moving overseas, signing new documents for opening bank accounts, that sort of thing. Is that correct?
That's correct. So usually if there's any situation where an overseas country would need to verify your identity and make sure that your documents aren't fraudulent documents, you need to go to a notary public so the notary can legalize the documents, so to say. And that's where, as Dave said, the Hague Convention would come in, and the notary would have to follow that simplified process if both the country you are in and the country where the document is needed are parties to the Hague Convention.
Okay, so before we get on to a question for PJ, can you tell us very briefly what is the process for authenticating documents in terms of the Hague Convention? You said it's a lot easier.
It's a lot easier. It helps the client because then the client would not need to go to a consulate to make an appointment. They can just go to a notary. Basically what the notary will do is look at the original document, then make a copy of it and put the notary stamp on the copy of the document. Then the notary will sometimes need to also attach a separate certificate which will authenticate the document or authenticate that, say it's an affidavit being signed. The certificate will say the notary has watched the person signing the document and it's their true signature. Then once that certificate is on, the document goes to the court and the registrar of the High Court has to then authenticate the notary's signature. So they attach an apostille, which is another certificate on top of the document. Once all of that's done, the document is then legalized for use in the other country.
Okay, great. PJ, something quickly to ask. I want to move overseas. So I go off to the notary, I get whatever documents I need done there, dealing with moving, that sort of thing. But I've built a life here. So when I go now, I've got to worry about things like retirement savings that I've got. I've got to deal with how can I move money overseas, that sort of thing. So first question for you, can I preserve retirement savings in South Africa when I'm moving overseas?
So yes, quite basic. Yes, you are. As soon as, let's say you had a pension fund, you are able to preserve it in a pension preservation fund. A provident fund can be preserved in a provident preservation fund. A retirement annuity can just be stopped, and whatever you've already invested will stay invested in the funds you left it in. It's even manageable, of course, with the internet these days. So most of the companies allow you with the click of a button to switch between funds within. So basically, absolutely no problem with that at all.
Other question: Can you actually take your pension fund from here and move it overseas to another country altogether, and then draw your pension from that pension fund overseas if you move there?
I've only actually seen transfers from old English Britain that you can transfer into South Africa. But no, you can't actually transfer it into another pension that I've seen before. Okay. So it's definitely not general practice, and I haven't seen one of all the transfers I've done that you can actually transfer into another pension fund in another country. No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, if we're moving and we want to take normal cash with us, not pensions or anything like that, how do we go about that? Is it allowed? How do we do it?
So it is allowed, I think, just to give it a base of where the Reserve Bank basically, or South Africa, why there are some limits to it, is if everyone starts running away with their money with rands and swapping it for dollars or for euros or anything, you're basically selling off the rand and weakening the rand, and also weakening the country. The economy of the country has less value in it as you take money out. So there are a few limits. The first is 1 million rand. That's called your discretionary allowance, that you can take up to 1 million rand without requesting a tax clearance certificate. That is basically the easy way out. Take money out, in and out, any way you want. Then you have, pardon? Per year, yes, per tax year, correct. Then you've got your second allowance, and that is your South African foreign investment or South African capital allowance. That's another 10 million rand. What's the difference on the second 10 million rand is that you need to apply for a tax clearance certificate, which basically means you're in good standing with SARS or you're not. All right, if you're in good standing, it's normally not a problem. It takes about, they have a turnaround time of 21 working days. And basically you'll get the allowance back. So no reserve bank involved in this process either, in terms of getting the go-ahead, so to speak. So more or less not too difficult to get about 11 million rand out.
Do you pay tax on the money, on the interest earned there in that country, or do you pay the tax here on that money?
So it depends on where you're resident for tax reasons, and I need to also, for the rest of the conversation, I'm unfortunately not legally allowed to give any tax advice, but I have seen quite a few cases, so I am allowed to give factual advice just for the rest of the conversation. Normally, from what I've seen, it's normally where you're resident. And if there's a double tax agreement, and that's more or less where I can go with that.
Okay. Now,
can I ask one more notary thing? Just on the notarial side, I practiced for about 30 years before I decided I would write the notary's exam. Only because Mark decided he was doing his immediately, so we decided to study together and write the exam at the same time. So we got our notaries, but Mark actually was the #1 top student in KwaZulu-Natal for that exam, just by the way.
We remember much of that, although there's another question, but anyway. Okay, PJ, last question for you quickly before we get back to a couple of things for Sasha is, when we move in, a lot of us have got life policies here and that sort of thing. Can South African life policies cover debt overseas?
Well, the straight answer is, firstly, can you be covered while you are on that side? And mostly the answer is yes. Companies start giving, asking for more and more, requirements when you only start your cover while you are abroad. But let's say you already have your cover on this side. They just ask you for travel questionnaire, mostly just for the sake of knowing if you're heading into any war-torn countries. That's normally a big problem. But let's say the first world countries, let's use Britain for instance. They won't really have a problem with that. So now you have a rand-denominated cover, but you have debt denominated in, let's say, pounds, and the pound moves around. So sometimes I guess if you make up in a certain, let's say you actually at a certain point, the pound to rand in your debt was at about 10 million rand. Let's say get yourself covered for 12.5 million, and you'll be sure to at least cover yourself with even the weakening of the rand in the meantime. So it is possible. Just keep an eye on the exchange rate, and I think that's the biggest problem.
Okay.
Second thing, sorry, Mark, one more thing. You do get dollar cover from South Africa these days. So it is possible. It's quite it's not with every company, but there are companies offering that.
No, that's great to know. So, Sasha, let's move on to something which I hope you don't mind me telling everybody, but that you're obviously considering at the moment. So for everyone, just to let you know, Sasha's engaged and going to be getting married shortly.
Oh.
So
the COVID-19 bride-to-bees.
Quick question. Are there any legal issues for a couple to consider before getting married?
Yes, there are. Well, firstly, if a couple wants to get married legally, they both need to be at least 18. If they aren't, then they'd need their parent or guardian to consent to the marriage. And then most of the legal consequences of marriage are around the financial consequences of what would happen in the case of death or divorce. So it's all about planning your finances when you get married, and that will determine which way you are getting married. If you're going to get married out of community of property or in community of property, each will have different consequences for your finances.
Okay. And if you want to get married in South Africa, what are the minimum documents that you need to have?
You need a valid proof of identity, so your identity document. If you're a foreign national, you'd need a passport, and you'd need ID photos. Then also, if you are entering into a marriage contract, an antenuptial contract, you'd need a lawyer's letter confirming that you have entered into that contract, and you'd need to give that to the marriage officer when they marry you.
Okay, you mentioned something interesting. If you're a foreigner, you need a passport. So tell us, can a South African marry a foreigner?
Yes, a South African can definitely marry a foreigner. What is noteworthy is if the husband-to-be is domiciled in South Africa, then South African law would apply to the marriage. But if the husband-to-be is domiciled in another country, then in terms of South African law, that other country's law will actually govern the marriage.
Can they still enter into an international contract if the marriage is going to be governed by the law of Germany, say? Can they enter into an international contract here?
They can enter into an antenuptial contract, but if the husband's domiciled in Germany, then he'd have to find out what the laws of Germany are, because those are the laws that would actually govern the marriage.
Yeah, I actually did an international contract for my daughter who was marrying an American and going to live there. So we registered the international contract here, but I did check the American law, and they would, if they wanted it to apply, they need to apply to have it applied to their marriage on that side.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point.
Okay, so if I want to get married in a foreign country, for an example,
Paris, for instance.
Italy. Will South African law govern the marriage? And will it be a valid marriage under South African law, even though I'm getting married overseas?
Yes, so you'd have to comply with the South African requirements for the marriage to be valid, which means you'd have to be married with a marriage officer and 2 witnesses present. And basically what most people do if they want to be married in France or Italy, they would get a marriage officer to just register their civil marriage in South Africa, so they'd get married civilly in South Africa, and then they would celebrate their wedding in Italy or Paris or wherever they want to be married.
I got married in New Zealand and Mark got married in France. But we didn't do anything here. I registered an international contract here, but I got married in New Zealand and I didn't do anything from there onwards. So I actually have no idea what the status is of my marriage in this country. But I was happy not to tell them anyway and get involved in more detail.
Okay, before we get back to PJ with a couple of questions, one more question. Can a man legally marry 2 wives in South Africa?
Yes.
husbands.
In South African law, a lucky man can marry 10 wives if he wants to, because customary marriage, the Customary Marriages Act actually recognizes polygamous marriages. The requirement would be that if the man wants to marry 2 wives or more, he'd need to make an application to the court. Just to the court can then make an order to say how the finances would work with the second and subsequent marriages.
It has to be your custom though, so I can't suddenly marry more people because it's not my normal custom to have more husbands and wives. So it has to be, you have to prove that it's part of your traditional custom to have more than one wife.
Yes.
Okay, PJ, relevant question now for you. Obviously, more than one wife results in things being quite expensive. So
one is expensive enough.
Before I'm getting married, how do I go about planning finances, allowing my spouse or spouses to maintain a standard of living? What happens if I become disabled? All that sort of thing. How do I help my new family plan for this?
International contract.
Well, let's start with that. But from my side, and the experience around, couples getting married and sitting in front of them, it's normally also a test for dependency right from the start. Just because you're getting married doesn't necessarily mean you need more cover, or you need to plan a little, much more. But as soon as you're starting to take on debt together, even as a couple before getting married, or of course children. So anything where you take yourself out of the picture and where you used to provide to the family is where it comes in, and we need to start planning quite well. In terms of, let's say, starting with the cover side is, of course, covering your debt properly with a lump sum amount. A little bit extra above that with another lump sum. That depends, that's quite subjective from person to person. And then an income to make sure your part of the expenses are covered, even in death or with disability, or if you become ill, which is actually statistically happening the most by far right now. On the investment side, quite a tricky one. I mean, a lot of couples in this country, most of them I ever meet, they have children, or they buy a house, and then from there on, it's very difficult to have money on top of that to save. So, of course,
especially now.
Especially now. Of course, your interest rate came down a little bit, dropped a little bit. So that makes life a little bit easier. But then income per family has dropped significantly. So it's not completely making up for that. But that's the whole thing about it as well. Is people love having children, and people really want that house. And one thing they don't consider is most of them can't retire after they have these two children or a house. They don't save enough eventually, and they can't retire at 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sasha, something for you quickly is, for the last 15 odd years, we've obviously in South Africa had marriages and we've had civil unions. Can you tell us a little bit about what the difference is between the two of them?
Okay, sure. So marriages have always been recognized in terms of the Marriages Act. And then in 2006, a new act came into play, which was called the Civil Union Act. And this act basically recognizes same-sex marriages or civil union partnerships between same-sex couples. The Civil Union Act does apply equally to heterosexual couples as it does to same-sex couples. And then the consequences of the civil union partnership or the marriage are actually the same processes and procedures as in terms of the Marriages Act. So what this means is if a same-sex couple gets married, they still can choose if they want to be married in community of property or if they want out of community of property, and they get that choice, but it's just recognized in terms of South African law now.
Okay, and then before we head back to Dave, because he said we're going to get back to some interesting things later that he's got for us, including something which is going to make him very popular with golfers. I think he told them all to go and find their balls or something like that, but we'll get to that now. But on the last thing on the notary side, Sasha, what are the best marriage contracts? Is there a difference between a marriage contract and an antenuptial contract? Is it better to marry with accrual or without accrual? What would you advise people if they're asking you those questions?
I would say it's very important to just see what would work best for you as a couple. Everyone is different, so there's definitely no best or worst way to get married. If people do come into the marriage with significant assets already, then it would make sense to enter into an antenuptial contract, because how that works is whatever's yours before the marriage would stay yours. And then from the time of the marriage, everything gets shared in the case of death or divorce. If parties do want to just share everything and they don't have any debt, then they can choose to be married in community of property. The only thing to be aware of there is that in community of property means your asset or your spouse's assets won't be protected if one of you is in debt, because then the creditors can come after your estate, seeing it's a joint estate. So those are the major differences. And it's really important to visit a lawyer who can advise you what would be best for your particular circumstances.
Can I just comment also, my office is generally in a poorer area, so most of the people coming to me to get married for an international contract have zero assets. So then it doesn't really make a difference whether you get married with the accrual system or without the accrual system. But in more affluent areas, or where the husband or the wife runs a business, it is definitely more critical that you reassess it then, because the one might be gathering assets and the other might not be gathering assets. And then whether it's fair to share or not to share are questions that need to be addressed.
Okay, Sasha, then I've just got two more quick questions for you. With regards to contracts and how you're married, if we take a marriage in community of property and a marriage out of community of property, things like buying a house, things like signing a lease agreement, any contracts like that, can you tell us about the signing requirements of documents and contracts depending on how you're married?
Sure. So when it comes to things like buying a house and you're married out of community of property, so that's where you've signed your antenuptial contract, then whoever's applying for the bond and actually buying a house, they would have to sign the sale agreement. So if only the husband is buying the house in his name, only he would have to sign the sale agreement. If both the parties want a 50-50 share of the house, they both still need to sign. However, within community of property and also with customary marriages, then both husband and wife do need to sign the sale agreement or the lease agreement or whatever contract they are entering into.
Okay, great. And then last thing, and I'm asking this relevant because I've had it once upon a time, I got a phone call panicked on a Saturday morning. And it was a bride-to-be marrying that afternoon saying, we forgot about our antenuptial contract. Help.
Oh, gosh.
So my question is, when does an antenuptial contract have to be done? Does it have to be registered at the deeds office before someone can get married? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so it's very, very important to sign an antenuptial contract before you actually get married in front of a marriage officer.
So it can be the same day.
It's fine if it's even a second before, as long as it is signed before you enter into the marriage. If you don't, then you would automatically be married in community of property. So even if it's on the same day, as long as you've signed in front of a notary before, because you can specify the time you've signed the contract, then that would be fine. And then the notary needs to make sure that that contract is registered with the deeds office within 3 months of the marriage. Okay.
Thanks. So let's move on to, again, what everyone's still topical on at the moment. Thanks very much to PJ for your input there. We'll get back to any other questions now. Dave, tell us a little bit about what's going on with Level 3 and COVID-19.
Yeah, I just really wanted to highlight a couple of strange things. For instance, under Level 3, your domestic worker can return to work, but your brother can't visit. So your domestic worker can stay in your house the whole day, touching everything, cleaning things, but your family can't visit you. So that's a strange anomaly of the system. Likewise, they've just allowed recreational fishing. So you can now go to the beach to fish if you have a permit for it, but you can't surf. And you can't suntan, and you can't exercise on the beach, but you can fish. So maybe in the next level or directions down the line, you'll get a suntan permit, maybe you'll get a wave level 5 permit, a wave level 2 permit, and you can jump bigger waves or smaller waves. It really is crazy. But I think the thing that people were most thankful for was that you could now buy liquor. So when I drove past Liberty Liquors yesterday, firstly, the parking lot was completely full, and secondly, they closed the gates and were now letting cars in one at a time, and there was a 2-lane triple parking right past for a couple of 100 meters down the road. So people definitely are thankful that they can buy their liquor. Then the other strange thing was you can now exercise from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but you still can't play certain sports where public facilities have been closed. So I was having an argument about the golf courses, because a golf course or a tennis club is generally a private operation. It's run and managed by a private club that has members. So it's not open to the public as such. So my argument was that golf courses are private and can be open, and you can play golf. But of course the golf clubs are too scared to take that, and the golfers are too frightened. So most of the golf courses are remaining closed for the moment until somebody waves a wand at them and says they can open. So it is a bit crazy. We are living in crazy, crazy times.
Dave, there was just one thing, Cotswold Downs. I understand that they followed instructions when you posted an article saying golfers find your balls.
Yeah.
And Cotswold Downs issued something regarding them being open and golfers being allowed to play if you're resident there. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, as I said, there's no reason why golf clubs that are privately managed should not be open. And so Cotswold Downs is one of them that has agreed, and they've opened it to their residents to play golf. But obviously not, if you remember, the public, because then it falls under the limitation that public places must stay closed. So they're winning.
Okay, great. Then, Sasha, last thing relevantly quickly. With regards to an antenuptial contract, obviously getting married is a very expensive, event. Can you give us a ballpark figure? What can people expect to pay for a consultation and drafting of an antenuptial contract?
Okay, well, the fees would range from 2,000 Rand upwards. It would depend on the complexity of the contract and how you want to get married. And also the consultation fee is usually included in the whole price. So 2,000 Rand, 3,000 Rand, just depending on the complexity of the contract.
Okay, great. And then very last question for you, PJ. With regards to policies, investments, all that sort of thing, and planning in marriage, does it matter to you as a financial planner whether people are married in or out of community of property?
Doesn't matter if it's in or out of community of property. I just want to hear that clearly. Is that what you asked?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So I must say things get quite complicated. Well, significantly more complicated as soon as someone is married in community of property. In a certain sense, a rule of thumb, I mean, you don't always have full control over your own things, because 50% of, especially at death, is the other person's. And that makes a difference to how you plan and what you leave when, the will is set up, when there's money in the bank to be distributed. So in terms of that, I'd say more complicated on the one side. What else is there? I must say you're welcome to ask further questions in terms of the subjective situations, but that's in a nutshell what I normally come across. And yeah, that's more or less it.
Yeah. Dave, what else do you want to share with us?
Just one thing, the complexity under the regulations is quite severe, and especially if you're moving around, whether you're moving for work or to visit or to look after your mother or something like that. So please have a look at our Facebook group, McNaughton Company Attorneys, and we have a comprehensive post on there that sets out every likely situation. Moving house, caring for somebody, going to work, heading to study, visiting family, heading to a funeral, moving your child. They're all on our website, on our Facebook group at least. So if you log onto our Facebook group, you can see exactly the process that is required for each movement and what document you need to have with you. So join our Facebook group.
Great, thanks. And then, everything with regards to this, we had a couple of people who joined us a little bit late. Well, the session has been recorded and it'll be live on our YouTube channel later this week. We'll post something on the Facebook group as well with regards to that link. And then finally, just to let you know again, obviously you've got a professional team that's been involved here today, so we're just going to give you some details as to how you can get hold of everybody. These will also again be up on the video on the YouTube channel. You can get hold of Sasha, who actually sits in our Santon office if you need to have a chat to her. And her email address is Sasha, S-A-S-H-A, at maclaw.co.za. You can get hold of PJ on pj.fourie at mweb.co.za. And ladies, PJ told us last week he is actually taken at the moment, so don't just send him emails if you're wanting his number. And apart from that, all our contact details are available on our website at www.maclaw.co.za. So thanks very much for joining us, and keep a look on our Facebook page for next week's webinar, which is going to be dealing with collections and evictions and all sorts of problems post-COVID.
Okay, cheers,
Thanks
everybody.
very much.
Thanks. Bye, guys.